In the late 1940s, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People wanted to challenge the segregated school systems in various states, including Kansas. In Topeka, the NAACP asked African American parents to try to enroll their children in all white schools. Every single one of these parents' requests were denied. One of these parents was Oliver Brown. He was told that his daughter would need to enroll in an African American school that was much further from a home than the all white school that she was not allowed to attend. The NAACP then filed a lawsuit. Not only was the education at the African American school not as good as the white schools, but this was also a violation of the 14th Amendment Protection Clause. Brown v. Board of Education was argued on December 9, 1952. Thurgood Marshall became the first African American to serve on the Supreme Court. The case was re-argued on December 8, 1953, until finally on May 17, 1954, there was a unanimous ruling. At first, the justices were divided on how to rule on school segregation, with Chief Justice Fred M. Vinson holding the opinion that the Plessy verdict should stand. But in September 1953, before Brown v. Board of Education was to be heard, Vinson died, and President Dwight D. Eisenhower replaced him with Earl Warren, the governor of California. If it weren't for the new Chief Justice, this wouldn't have come to a unanimous vote.
This was a Civil Rights Act case that argued that state-sanctioned segregation of public schools was a violation of the 14th Amendment and was therefore unconstitutional. Racial segregation in public schools violated the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which prohibits the states from denying equal protection of the laws to any person within their jurisdiction. The case that came to be known as Brown v. Board of Education was actually the name given to 5 separate cases that were heard by the U.S. Supreme Court concerning the issue of segregation in public school. These cases were Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka, Briggs v. Elliott, Davis v. Board of Education of Prince Edward County, Bowling v. Sharp, and Gerbhardt v. Ethel. While the facts of each case are different, the main issue in each was the constitutionality of state-sponsored segregation in public schools. Once again, Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund handled these cases.
Brown v. the Board of Education of Topeka was a Supreme Court case in 1954 where the justices ruled unanimously that racial segregation of children in public schools was unconstitutional. Brown v. Board was one of the cornerstones of the Civil Rights Movement. It helped establish the precedent that separate but equal education and other services were in fact not equal at all.
Plessy v. Ferguson was the first similar case. Louisiana enacted the Separate Car Act, which required separate railway cars for blacks and whites. In 1892, Homer Plessy agreed to challenge the act. He was technically black under Louisiana law, but was asked to sit in a whites-only car of Louisiana train because he appeared to be white. On May 18, 1896, the Supreme Court delivered its verdict in Plessy v. Ferguson in declaring separate but equal facilities constitutional. The court ruled that the protections of the 14th Amendment applied only to political and civil rights like voting and jury services, and not social rights, which would be sitting in a railroad car of your choice.
The second case was Sweat v. Painter. Heman Sweat was rejected from the University of Texas Law School because he was black. He sued the school officials alleging a violation of the 14th Amendment. The Supreme Court examined the educational opportunities at the University of Texas Law School and a new law school at the Texas State University for Negroes and determined that the facilities, curriculum, faculty, and etc. were not equal at all. Therefore, they ruled that Sweat's rights had been violated. The justices examined the two schools and reasoned that other factors such as the reputation of the faculty and influence of the alumni could not be equalized.
In this first picture, we see a nonviolent protest from the black community about segregation in schools and how they're protesting against it and how they believe that African Americans should be involved in the schools with white people also, and that there should not be any segregation in the schooling. This next picture shows a mother and a daughter of a black family with a newspaper that says, "High Court bans segregation in public schools." This is a great depiction that shows that a family is no longer having to deal with segregation in schooling. It is a great opportunity for the black community to be involved with the white community.
This political cartoon shows the hands of a black man handcuffed by segregated schools. it shows that the black men and women were always lacking freedom because of the law that made segregated schools legal. And then it shows the hands of a white man enforcing the Supreme Court's decision to break up the idea of segregated schools, which led to desegregation.
In this first graph, it shows the percent of black students in majority white schools. And in 1968, it was at a very low with only 23.4% of black students in a majority white school, and at the highest in 1988 with 43.5% of majority black students in white schools.
This map is showing that in 1954, the Supreme Court ruled against segregation, and the state laws varied widely on this topic. The orange states required segregation, the green states prohibited segregation, and the states shown in blue had no specific laws about segregation, and the yellow states made segregation a local option.